I'm the master of awkward pauses.
I know. I usually try to let it go
Yeah.
10 seconds or so. Kick it off. All right. Welcome back to another live show. I'm your host, Emily Bose. Really excited to be speaking today to Albert Bellamy. Albert is a Marine Corps veteran and a data science professional. And I'm really excited to talk to him just about careers in data. He does a lot of work helping folks transition into that field and would love to, just pick your brain, hear a little bit, dig into some of the insights that you have around that. So, Albert, why don't we start by getting a little bit of your background? Can you give us just sort of the Cliff Notes version of how you got to where you are today?
Sure. I was 20 plus years in the Marine Corps. I did primarily logistics and artillery during that time. I kind of always knew that I wanted to be a data analyst when I got out of the Marine Corps. And so I had a leg up on a lot of peers that way just because that's one of the biggest struggles for people getting out of the service is what do I do next? I always
Right.
knew what I wanted to do next, so that was easy for me. The question was how.
Hmm.
Um, and so, I often joke, it's not really a joke, more or less accurate, that at one point I was sitting in front of a blank Google screen and typing in what is data science. And that was because I knew what it was called. It was called something totally different within the military.
Hmm.
And I never really got to do it in the military. I was angling my career towards doing something with analytics and then made the decision to get out instead. And so I had to figure out, like, no kidding, what is this thing called
Hmm.
outside of the Marine Corps? Once I did, I sort of dove into it and really just immersed myself in the culture and in the industry. And that's really, it's paid off well for me, much more so than just mastering the technical aspects and just being kind of a head down nerd.
And what are some of the key things that you think you brought from that military experience that have really influenced even just your career trajectory within the data science field? Because I know you said you didn't really get to work in data per se in the military, or at least not in like your official job title capacity. So,
Yeah.
um, what are some of the things that you feel like you've kind of brought with you that have made a big impact that tie into your military experience?
You learn a lot of adaptability, especially as an officer, especially as a Marine officer. You just get tasked with doing
Mm.
so many different things. And I remember so many times in my career sort of lamenting that I never got to get good at any one thing. That
Mm.
wound up paying dividends because you wind up becoming very flexible and very, very able to upskill quickly and try and, just at first you get a new job and your objective is just let me stop drowning real quick and just get to where I'm not terrible at this. And eventually you get to the point where you're actually kind of good at it and you sort of look around and you say, wow, I'm surprised at how quickly I developed a set of skills with this.
Mm.
And then, of course, in the military, as soon as you don't stink at something, they're going to pull you out and make you do something else. It's not always the case outside of the military. It is sometimes the case. Um, but yeah, you become very comfortable being uncomfortable and being put into unfamiliar situations and just being able to tread water until you know what the heck you're doing. I actually just came from a client before this where almost everything that they were talking about technologically was totally new to me and I'm just frantically taking notes and going, okay, I need to look up all these terms. I need to feed this whole meeting
Mm.
transcript into ChatGPT and have it explain these things to me. So that's a wonderful tool that we have now. Um,
Absolutely.
but I wasn't panicked in that meeting just because they were talking about things
Mm.
that weren't terribly familiar to me. It was like, well, I'll figure this out. 5 minutes after the meeting.
Right. And that inner knowing that you can figure things out, like you said, that resilience and adaptability is huge. That's a massive thing
Yep.
to have. It's something that
It's
I
difficult to develop. It's not
yeah,
something that is easy to build outside of the military.
yeah, they do a particularly good job with that, I think. And I know since you've been now in the data science field for a little while, you've really developed a passion for helping folks transition into data science. Some of the work you're doing with major data and career coaching people around that. Not necessarily veterans, though I know you're open to veterans.
Hmm.
But tell me a little bit about that. Like, how did you get started with it, and what do you do within that?
Yeah. I think my story is very similar to a lot of veterans who wind up getting out and starting their own business. I absolutely never intended to start a business. In retiring from the Marine Corps, I was 100% committed to being a salaryman for the rest of my career, finding a great job or two or three, kind of moving around, building my 401k to the point where I could retire to Florida and that's all she wrote. Um, a lot of it
It's a good plan.
just, yeah, oh yeah, I still may head down to Florida at some point. But a lot of it was born out of just wanting to help people. And a
Mm,
couple of things were tremendously surprising to me after retirement. And one was how quickly people start coming to you for advice.
hmm,
It's literally, I was mid retirement and I was out there putting out posts on LinkedIn about, I did this with my medical claim, and I did this with this is what I'm studying, and I've started going to these networking events. And almost immediately people started coming to me saying, can you review my resume? Can you look over, can you recommend me schools for this, that, and the other?
hmm,
And and it was stunning to me at first. It was like, I don't have any idea what I'm doing. Why would anyone come to me for help? And after that first initial shock, where I probably told a couple of people like, hey, I can't answer your questions because I've got no idea myself. Again, comfortable being uncomfortable. I started saying, well, I don't know how much I can give you, but here's what I know. And I started reading people's resumes and saying, I don't know 100% what a great resume looks like. However, here's what I can tell you about the effectiveness of your writing or the
hmm,
length of it and as I went along and I started to get into positions where I was bringing veterans into workplaces and I was evaluating their resumes and their applications. I was, sitting in on interviews with them at times. I started noticing patterns and things that they were doing wrong. A lot of them were things that I had done wrong 3, 6, 9 months earlier. And once I started figuring those things out, then I started giving better and better advice. And a lot of it was just putting out content. So put out a LinkedIn post like, here's what a good
hmm,
resume looks like. Here's what mistakes that veterans make. Fix these things and you'll be ahead. And what I found was more and more people started coming to me for help, so much so that it was becoming overwhelming time commitment. And I just wasn't able to help as many people as I wanted to. My message inbox was filling up and I wasn't able to respond to them. I had programs going on myself where I was learning things as well. And it started getting to where people were falling by the wayside and I was having to get software to build, to have coffee chats with people and now I was paying for things to make it easier to help people. So,
hmm.
now I'm coming out of pocket for stuff like that. And at some point, someone asked me, like, hey, what if they asked me for help and I said, I've got, 20 people ahead of you. And they said, what if I paid you $50 to cut the line? It just blew my mind. It's like, oh, you're gonna pay me to review your resume? Like, what? How much? That doesn't make any sense. And at first, I was just offended. I was like, no, I'm not. I don't take money for this. I do this for free. After a while, it started to kind of make sense. It's like, okay, well, yeah, I mean, this is a service that's worth money, and if you're willing to pay for it,
Yeah.
sure, I'll do yours first. And one thing led to another, more systems to handle workflow, and then it was like, okay, well, maybe I could offer this as a service, and you know, then it kind of all went downhill from there.
Here we are now. What do you
Yeah,
think are some of the biggest misconceptions that people have about getting into data science or getting into this field in general? If it's something they're interested in and they don't know where to start, what are some of the things you think are either misconceptions or some of the places that people should, be thinking about as they're wanting to approach this industry?
yeah. I find the biggest misconception, not just veterans, but anybody has about getting into data science or data analytics is they assume it's more difficult than it is. They
Hmm.
assume that they need more credentials or any credentials, in fact. And the opposite is true. There's no pilot's license to be a data analyst. You don't need an engineering degree to hang out your shingle and say, I'll do exploratory data analysis or visualizations or whatever for you. You can just claim the title, as we say. And a lot of what I do with coaching people to transition into the industry, it's a lot more mental than it is technical. People have
Hmm.
to accept that they are enough to do the job. Now, there are some very low level prerequisites. I mean, you have to have a mind for math and a natural curiosity, and just, you know uh,
Hmm.
that there are people of a certain mindset that it's just not going to be for you. I'm always concerned when I hear people say I'm looking into data analytics, and I ask, okay, well, what appeals to you about it? And they say I can work remotely and it's good money. It's The money's not that
Yeah.
great, and those are absolutely both the wrong reasons to get into it.
Yeah.
You want to
Those aren't
you
the
want to
right
do it
reasons to get
because
into any job, honestly.
true, yeah. But you want to do it because you got the love. And
Right.
it's funny because just yesterday I was having a conversation with a Marine officer who's transitioning out, and she asked me, I see all these answers everywhere about how to get into data analytics. My question is why? And
Hmm.
I was
That's
just
great. That's a great question.
blown away. Yeah, and I made a big post about it today and screenshotted her comment with her permission and just said, how often do we actually ask that? That's tremendously important. But, and that transcends all fields. I lost track of the number of veterans and transitioning service members that I see saying, oh, I should get a project management certificate. Well, why?
Yes.
Oh, because my sergeant major told me it's a good idea, or I've heard that there's good jobs in that. Do you enjoy doing that? But like,
Right.
have you talked to people that do that and something there resonates with you? Is that how your mind works? Because if not, you're just doing something by default because, oh, I was an officer or a staff NCO and I led teams. That's a really bad reason to get into a job. Um, so yeah, I think
Totally
we
agree.
we as service members, veterans, even military spouses, we spend way too little time delving into the why. What am I going to be good at? What will I enjoy
Mm.
doing? Again, I had a massive advantage because I knew full well this was in my blood. This was everything that I wanted to do. But I see
Right.
so many people coming out, going into all sorts of fields that they're just woefully unsuited for. And they wind up miserable and kind of back to square one, you know, a year, 2 years, 3 years out of the service, and now they got bills to pay and they're starting over.
That's a great point. And having worked with a lot of transitioning military members, I can't tell you how many times I've heard the remote and good pay as
Hmm.
reasons to go after different jobs. And I mean, a lot of remote jobs have gone away. And
Yes.
sometimes if you hate the work, the amount of money you make isn't going to be worth it.
Yeah.
We had actually a really interesting conversation with someone who was like, I will do whatever job I'm interested in making the most amount of money, and ended up getting into a job where they made a lot of money and absolutely hated it and
Hmm.
didn't realize how many things had been built into their military experience that had made it really valuable, like the team and the support and
Yeah.
the camaraderie. And ended up kind of in a sort of more toxic type environment where those pieces weren't really present,
Ah,
and was like, oh, yeah, doesn't matter how much money you make if the environment isn't supportive, if you're not doing work that you actually care about, So
yeah.
it was a really interesting thing to see that, kind of play out over time, and the impact that that had. So obviously, folks can go check out your post, but since we're talking about it, do you mind giving a little overview of some of your top reasons why people might want to get into data analytics?
Yeah, absolutely. What I told the young lady that asked me was if you, at a base level, if you enjoy solving problems with numbers, that's about the long and the short of it. I've never met a data analyst that didn't love that at some level. Now, there's a whole lot
Hmm.
of talk out there about you don't need a, XYZ degree. Absolutely true. You don't need to have gotten straight A's in math back in high school or college. I
Hmm.
certainly did not, mostly because I never did
Okay.
my homework. But you don't need to have a brilliant mathematical or statistical mind in order
Okay.
to be successful. There is a baseline. I've definitely, my sister, God love her, she's terrible at math and she would not be a good data analyst, and she'd be the first to tell you that.
That is
Um,
hilarious.
so there are definitely people that, like I said, it's not for you. I don't care how much money or how remote you want to be.
Yeah.
You're going to be miserable.
I don't think it's for me. I'm
Yeah,
probably one of those people. I have a little
yeah.
of
Well, that's why I
the,
say the
I forget
Marine who
what you call it. I
smiles. It's
switch numbers and, do
yeah.
some of those
Oh,
things in my
transpose.
brain. And I'm like, yeah, I'm like, I'm
Yep.
smart. I can actually do math relatively well,
Yeah.
but I didn't, you give me a spreadsheet of a lot of information that I have to very carefully work my way through. And it's like my worst nightmare.
Yeah. The great
It's
data
terrible.
analysts love it. I mean, they
Right.
they look at a
I know people
spreadsheet
that
and
just
they get
thrive in
excited.
that. Yes.
Yes. And
There
that's
you go.
me. That's why I got to laugh in a transition event where I said I'm the Marine that smiles at spreadsheets, and I'm not particularly funny, so anything that gets a laugh, I'm like, let's double down on that. So I'm stuck with it now. People like, I wouldn't say they stop me on the street, but people are you the Marine who smiles at spread? Yes, I am. Drives my wife
That's
nuts.
amazing.
Yeah.
That is
Um,
amazing.
but yeah, it's on a base level. You have to enjoy that, or
Yeah,
you're just going to struggle and it's going to be
I think that's a
miserable.
great point. Something you mentioned, I think, is also really good to hear and for people to keep in mind if they're interested in this career field is, what are some of the things that people need to do to actually get in? If they know,
Yeah.
okay, I see a spreadsheet, I get really excited, I love solving problems with numbers. How do I start? Do I need to go to college and get a degree in data science, or do I need to have certain certifications? That I think is something that really holds people back, or gives people
Yeah.
big question marks.
And it's all imposter syndrome. If you know that you have just an analytical mind and you have a natural curiosity, you look at a spreadsheet of numbers and you say, I want to crack this open and figure out its secrets. If you've got that in your blood, that's all you really need.
Hmm.
And from there, it's just a question of building the confidence that you can do the job far more than any technical capability. Now, what you're going to find is if you're not at least decent at using Excel, if you can't, everything you can be trained, and you can be trained to a competent level in fairly short order. There's
Okay.
a being able to query a database with a query language called SQL or SQL, depending on where you're from in the world. That's kind of a baseline skill. So Excel, SQL, and then usually people will say if you have a what's called a business intelligence platform, and the two leaders are Tableau and Power BI. But there's plenty of others. I work for another business intelligence platform. Um, yeah, but there's no kind of secret formula to it. To me, the secret formula is you've got to have the confidence to say I can do the job, walk into an interview, own the space, meet with people, network effectively, all of those things. I
Mm,
have personally seen and coached people to full-time jobs in data analytics with tremendously meager technical skills zero credentials. If they have a college degree, it's in some wildly unrelated field, liberal arts, humanities, history, something like that. Um, but they have an analytical mindset and they have the love for the game,
Mm,
and that's really all you need.
that makes a lot of sense. Besides veterans, I know you and I were chatting before, and you mentioned there's a few other groups that you've seen quite a few, different types of people coming through. I think it's
Mm.
interesting for companies to know if they're maybe looking to hire raw talent, non-traditional talent that wants to get into the data space. Who are some of the up and coming folks that you see that have the capacity to do data really well, but might not have the background? Who are some of the people you've seen kind of coming through your group, or types of people that have really stood out?
Yeah, it's a ton of teachers. There's which is a little worrisome,
Yeah.
but a lot of people getting out of the teaching profession, getting out of academia in general.
Mm,
So yes, there's plenty of kind of public school type teachers, elementary and high school teachers. They tend to have to deal with a lot of data in teaching, which strangely
right.
enough is a bit of a turnoff for a lot of people that want to teach, but a strangely large number of them wind up in data analytics. Um,
Interesting.
so a lot of that, but just a lot of academics in general. So we get a lot of college
Hmm,
professors, we get a lot of researchers, people getting out of the education field. But like I said, they tend to deal with a lot of data. So if they don't hate it,
right.
it's kind of a natural fit.
That makes
Um,
sense.
yeah, a lot of people, kind of researchers in data heavy fields. So we get a lot of people coming out of like manufacturing. Um,
Mm.
what else? I'm trying to think of what I've got a farmer now that's one of my
Oh,
contacts, and he did
interesting.
some of my classes recently. Yeah, and he's done some amazing projects on like soil acidity and pH and all of that
Oh,
stuff, and
yeah.
he does amazing visualizations with little squares of farmland and the
Wow.
research that he's done, and I was just like, hey, embrace that, roll into it. So I got a couple of those with like one guy with like an animal husbandry degree, and um, yeah, there's a lot of people, and just I think it represents the fact that the march of data is kind of ever forward, and it's taking over a lot of different industries. So much
Mm,
so that there's a lot of demand for non full-time data analysts to have a better understanding of data analytics because it's becoming a bigger and bigger requirement of their job. And there's constantly people that are saying, hey, maybe I don't like actually farming the land, or maybe that's kind of too hectic or stressful a job for me, but I can be a data analyst for other farmers and I can
mm.
still stay in this industry that maybe I enjoy, but in a different capacity. And I think that's
Interesting. Yeah.
a lot of the teachers. When I talk to them, I have a few clients right now where I talk to them and they say, still want to help, still want to be in the profession of teaching people
Right.
and be in that game, just not in front of a class day in, day out.
That makes sense. And I mean, to that point, you could see even your farmer's wife or spouse, or even military spouses, potentially really doing well in that
Yeah.
space if they're, wanting to connect with a field that possibly is a little more portable or remote friendly, depending on who you're working with. Um, and I mean, military spouses deal with some pretty incredible
Hmm.
logistics and stuff to manage, everything that goes into that life. So
And
that could
remote
I could
work
see
is
that being a really
very,
interesting
yeah,
future.
remote work very appealing for them as well because that God knows where they have to move next.
Right,
Yep.
exactly, exactly. That's so interesting. Is there so if someone, I'm even thinking about like an active duty military member who knows they have a year, or even
Mhm.
high school senior, or someone that's interested in getting into a field like this. where maybe they don't want to go to college, or not, for 4 years, or they want to get their foot in the door before they commit to, a degree or something like that. Would you recommend that they like learn some SQL? I mean, I
Hmm.
imagine there's YouTube videos for transitioning military. You can get a year of all of the LinkedIn classes for
Yes.
free. I'm sure they've got some things related to data. There's like Udemy and Coursera and a million different places. But like, if someone just wanted to dip their toes in the water and they had a little bit of time, um, would you start with something like that, just learning some SQL, or getting in and playing around in Tableau or Excel? Like, what do you think would be like a first step that someone could take?
My experience is if you start with training, you're going to get bored very quickly.
Mm,
And it's a concept we call tutorial hell. You start gamifying the training itself, and a lot of these training platforms are very good at, it's like playing games on your phone. It's just you
yeah.
complete a level and the little stars explode and you get 50 points and great, and a
Yes.
little ribbon, and they're great at that, and it feeds the dopamine receptors in the brain. You're like, "Ooh, look at me." You very quickly realize that you're learning very little. It's not
Hmm.
terribly applicable. You're also not applying your skills in you're applying your skills in what I call a sandbox, which means it's in a very kind of safe little,
Right.
game-like environment. You're not actually installing a piece of software on your machine and saying, "Okay, how do I get this booted up?" And that, because that's the environment that you would eventually work in. My recommendation is start with a problem,
Hmm.
and preferably start with a problem where there's a lot of data available, because invariably what happens is you start with a problem, you're like, I want to analyze the National Hockey League draft. And that's probably a bad example because there's a lot of data for that. But you see something and you're like, I want to analyze crime statistics. Well, you may not have crime statistics available for your local
Hmm.
area.
Okay.
So something that's a passion project, maybe put that on the back burner, but find something where there is a lot of data available and that is interesting to you, and where there's a problem or a curiosity that you want to solve. That's something that will actually hold your interest. It's also going to force you to do real data analytics type stuff. So when you talk about, you have to download a data set, you have to examine it, you have to make sure that it's clean and complete and it's sufficient to answer the question that you have. Then you have to pull it into a realistic environment. So if you're going to query the database, you have to open it in some actual database software rather than some academic platform.
Right.
Um, if you want to do something, if you want to do some programming with it, you have to bring up a real coding environment and start putting in Python commands. So all of those things, and those things are by and large very accessible. A lot of the software that you need is open source, or there
Hmm.
are trial versions or kind of user versions that are free, or for kind of a
Student
nominal fee.
versions or things like
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
and a lot of the stuff you can get. If there is a charge for it, there's a military program that will cover it for you. Usually there's so many military programs that will cover it for you. It's a question of trying to figure out which one you want to use. But really, it's the information is all out there. You can get all the information on YouTube through free programs through the military, through very low cost programs through the military. The only thing that you have to pay for, or would have to pay for, is if you want a kind of a high level boot camp that is going to give you the clear arrow from here to success. It's going to give you a lot of supervision. If that's the case, if somebody wants to know which ones I recommend, definitely send me a message and I'll talk to you
Yeah.
about a couple of them. Some are great, some are not so great, and I'm happy to talk about which is which on a one-to-one basis. But yeah,
Totally.
if you're dipping your toe in the water, yeah, you can ask me about that too. The Google Data Analytics certificate is one you can do for free as a transitioning service member. and it's a good kind of toe in the water. It's great content. It's super low stress. It's at your own pace. But
Mm,
that's one that you can get in there and say, okay, if this is interesting to me, if this is kind of drawing me forward, and all of these things that I'm doing are things that I enjoy, maybe that's something that it would give you an indication if this job is for you. If you're falling asleep doing the Google search, maybe look elsewhere.
that's a great point. And I think having those opportunities to dip your toes in the water for, like I said, whether it's someone wanting to transition out of, huge career transitions at any point, whether it's from teaching or something else, or from the military, or even from high school into the workforce. Like there's so many different major career transitions. I know, parents returning to work, military spouses, all kinds of different things. So
Yeah,
having those small incremental steps you can take to see if it's something you like before you have to make a huge commitment of time, I think is really great. And it's never going to hurt you to have some data skills in your back pocket, no matter
sure.
what field you go into. To your point, data is everywhere.
Yeah,
We're constantly having to solve problems. No matter what type of job you do, you're probably going to work with some level of data, and having some skills around it won't hurt. Two kind of final questions for you. So, from the company side, because I know you said now you're in a position where you are working, more on the level where you're getting to interview and hire people. Um, if you could wave a magic wand and change anything about the way that, new incoming data analysts are hired, what would you change to try to make that process better?
what I change about how they're hired. Oof.
Or what hiring managers look for in, in new data analysts, because you've been in some of those rooms. And like, if
Yeah.
someone from a company is watching and they're someone that hires data analysts, from your perspective, what do you think are things that could be done better, done differently, to maybe allow more folks to come in that might not be considered otherwise, or
Yeah.
just help improve that environment for new analysts?
Yeah, I think it's and I've seen this in some places more than others. It's the rewarding a desire to learn. And
Mm,
and I don't mean that to tell people to get in there and try and everybody gets in the interview room and they try to say, "Well, I don't know this, but I'm a quick learner." People love to say that. Most people aren't quick learners. Like 98% of the population learns at the exact same rate. Um, so quick learner, it's like you can say you like to learn. Okay, I
right.
enjoy learning. I'm constantly learning new skills. All of those valid things. So telling somebody you're a quick learner, that's like saying, hey, I consume oxygen. Like, got it.
Right. I
You
walk
have a
fast.
functioning brain. Yeah. um but yeah, if you say the other one is like, don't talk about your passion, nobody cares. um but yeah, just establish that if somebody asks you a question that you don't know the answer to, we had this thing in Marine Corps boot camp that we were taught to say, and I always thought it was corny at the time, but it was really kind of a good instinct to instill in people. And that was, if the inspecting officer asked you a question, a history question, you didn't know what the answer was, you would say, sir, this recruit does not know at this time, but we'll find out. Um, and essentially, it was just that's the attitude that I want data analysts to have. Like,
Mm,
if I sit here and ask you a question about every aspect of the software that we use, you're not going to be able to answer all of those questions. And that's fine. And we've interviewed people and they couldn't answer my questions. The people that I wanted to hire were the people that said, "Ooh, don't know the answer to that one, but let me get back to you as soon as the meeting is done. I'd really love to look that up and learn, and cover one of my skill gaps." If you say that, I'm sold.
mm,
Like, you're my kind of people. The people that kind of ticked me off were people that would try and double speak and obfuscate and try and cover
uh,
their gaps and basically lie to me and pretend like they knew something that I knew they didn't. Didn't like that, and people that would just kind of let the moment drop. Um, just say like, "Oh yeah, I don't know the answer to that," and then we're just sort of sitting there staring at each other. It's
oh,
like,
interesting.
okay.
Yeah.
Moving on. But yeah, those two things just
Awkward.
yeah. Now I don't feel like you have the right attitude. But yeah, anybody that says, hey, that's an information gap for me. That's not something I've encountered before, but I'm tremendously curious now. Let me go look that up. And then if you actually do it, back in boot camp, I wasn't going to go, if I didn't know an answer, I wasn't going to go find the lieutenant and knock on his door downstairs and be like, "Hey, I got that answer for you." Like, that would be ludicrous. But the attitude was what mattered.
Right.
If you're in an interview and you don't know a question, it's a technical question, that's kind of a problem. Like they're not answering you like stump the chump questions. They're asking you
Right.
questions of things that you probably need to know for that job. So if you don't know it, that is a shortfall and you need to address that. And sometimes just after the interview, sending an email or making a phone call if you can, but certainly like emailing the person back, thanking them for the interview, thanking them for the opportunity, and then saying, "Hey, don't know if this is a deal breaker or not. However, that question you asked me, I couldn't go to sleep without looking it up. Here's my
Mm,
answer, and if I had another chance, here's how I would have answered that question." I have heard so many stories of people doing that, and in certain circumstances, maybe they didn't get that job, but that generally makes such a positive impression that hiring manager or recruiter, whoever's dealing with it, is like, let me put a little gold star next to this person's name,
yeah.
and they're going to be the first person I call when we've got another job coming up.
I can tell you, having spent the last, I think I've been in recruiting in various capacities since
Mm.
2018, and that's very rare that someone does
Yep.
that. So just sending a thank you email, honestly, is pretty rare at
Oh
this
yeah.
point. So if somebody did that, it would certainly stand out in a positive way. So I think that's great. And we'll just table my other question for now. I think you landed the plane on such a good spot. I don't want to
Nice.
take us down another rabbit trail. So let's wrap it up there. But thank you so much for all the insight that you shared. I think this was a great conversation and hopefully really added value to anyone that's interested in getting into the data space. I'm really excited to be highlighting more opportunities like this for
Yeah.
folks that are just looking for, good career opportunities that might just be a little off the beaten path of what they've been
Yeah.
exposed to before, and helping them figure out what some of those things could be. So really appreciate your time and your insight.
Absolutely. Thanks, Emily. Appreciate you having
You're
me.
welcome. Of course. And if anybody's interested in learning more about what you're doing, they can go to your LinkedIn. It was
I'm
linked
easy
on
to
the
find.
event. Welcome to connect with you as well. Yeah. The Marine that smiles at spreadsheets.
That's the one.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.